Okay, Vince, DeSantis has had some really exciting moments, but how much of this is just really good TV versus what some of his advantages are in becoming the GOP nominee?
Well, on the media front, I think it's interesting that he's circumventing the corporate press, and he needs to because he needs to build up that social media following to get anyone anywhere within spitting distance of Donald Trump. Just think about, for instance, their Twitter followers, as you were just talking about. Ron DeSantis right now is a little under 2 million on Twitter. For most people, that would be good, but Donald Trump is in the vicinity of 80, 90 million people following him on Twitter. So Ron DeSantis is a long way to go, and obviously he's going to try and use that tonight. And then on the issues front, I think Ron DeSantis has a pretty interesting and good track record behind him. This is what he's going to run on: his legislative accomplishments in Florida, fighting for families and parents in Florida, fighting back against the medical state in Florida, fighting for liberty there. And those are the themes that he's going to lean on in this campaign, try and draw a distinction from Donald Trump on some things where he says, for instance, Donald, I would have fired Anthony Fauci. Donald Trump kept him around. And your life was miserable as a result of that. Those are the types of things you're going to hear from him. I think finally, the one thing I'm looking for is Ron DeSantis to introduce himself personally to the public. We know a lot about his policies, but we don't know as much about his military career, his time at Yale, his time playing baseball, his wife, Casey DeSantis. She's a breast cancer survivor. They've got 3 kids. So that part begins today.
And that's an interesting point because really he just spoke about faith very strongly this past week. And it was really the first time you saw him take such a bold stance that would appeal to evangelical voters. Do you think that he's going to be able to open up in an authentic way?
Well, he needs to, and this is one of the key differences between these two men. Donald Trump is a much better retail politician. Donald Trump is very capable of working a room. And really, even people who disagree with him, he just has a charm to him. And he's honestly, as much as he's kind of an insult comic when we see him on television, the reality is he's a very likable figure. And although he's polarizing, obviously, and Ron DeSantis needs to obviously work on that, and he needs to be seen as taking seriously the concerns of American voters everywhere as he travels about the country in this presidential race, because what they're looking for, what they should be looking for, and I think many are, is not about which guy do I like the best, which one of these, who's going to serve me, the American voter, the best. That is, of course, always the fundamental question.
Right. And it will be a matter of connection. You mentioned, obviously, former President Trump polarizing, bombastic, says things, puts his foot in his mouth. Both sides would agree with that. But if you talk to anybody who's met him, who knows him, they would say he's a very gracious person until you start swinging. And then if you try to push him in a corner, he's going to come out with all of his guns. But in terms of DeSantis, do we see the future being a softer, gentler side? Because he, too, has been very bombastic. He, too, has created a reputation and a name for himself that he's kind of Trump light, or a younger version of former President Trump.
We'll see. What I do know, and I think that Donald Trump demonstrated, is that American voters do like fighters. They do like people, as long as they are left with the impression that fighter is fighting on behalf of them. These two men are about to engage in, I would say, some of the most intense political combat that we've seen in a very long time. At the Daily Caller, where I'm also an editor, my colleague Diana Glebova is reporting this morning that Donald Trump's campaign tends to take, they intend to take Ron DeSantis's head off. That's their plan.
Oh.
And you'll see a flurry of that beginning today. Ron DeSantis, people close to him, say that he's going to engage in a game of rope-a-dope, a boxing term where you basically let the guy tire himself out by throwing a ton of punches early in the fight. And that's what they expect Donald Trump to do. So this is about to get interesting very quickly.
I want to just mention the polling one more time. I know it's been a lot of there's been a lot of banter over it. Even some now speculating that the polls aren't reflecting what is true. But former President Trump certainly surging in the polls. He has 56% support right now in the latest Real Clear Politics average. DeSantis is way down at 19%. How much should Americans pay attention to these polls, and what can we read between the numbers and the lines?
Well, obviously, things change when a guy's actually announced as a candidate for president. So I imagine that those numbers are going to change, and they could perhaps change meaningfully. But the reality is that right now, Donald Trump's up by 5 touchdowns in the first quarter. And that's a big lead to overcome. So we'll see. Ron DeSantis has a lot of ground to catch up on here. One thing I'll point to, though, one of the reasons why Donald Trump has been able to establish such distance from the rest of the field, to include Ron DeSantis, is because of the ongoing probes and attacks going on against him.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.